Welcome in, everyone, to this deep dive all about occupational health psychology. I am really excited for this one. We'll be trying to really get a handle on what makes a workplace like truly healthy. Not just like surface level, but what really helps people thrive and what causes all that nasty stress. And yeah, how can both individuals and organizations come out on top in the end?
It's a really fascinating area. There's so much research on how much our work lives impact, well, basically every part of our well-being.
Yeah, it's not just like, oh, I had a bad day at work. It's like it really seeps into everything, huh?
Absolutely. And we're not just talking about like individual happiness here, but also how all of this ties into a company's success, right? Like how effective they can be, even their bottom line.
Oh, for sure. It's like one big interconnected system, which is kind of what makes this topic so complex.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, before we get too far down the rabbit hole here, can we just like define what exactly occupational health psychology is for anyone tuning in? Is like, wait, what are we talking about here?
Well, at its core, it's a field that tries to improve basically two main things: employee well-being and organizational effectiveness. Like the idea is that a truly healthy workplace, it actually benefits everyone involved, not just the worker bees, right?
Right. So it's looking at that whole system, not just like, oh, here's a stressed out employee, let's fix them.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
much more comprehensive than that.
Gotcha. One thing that really jumped out from all the stuff you sent over to prep for this was just how big of an impact workplace stress actually has. Like, it's not just we feel a bit grumpy, right? It's so much more than that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The research is super clear on this. Like, workplace stress messes with our creativity, how satisfied we are with our jobs, and even like basic stuff, like how we make decisions, you
Well,
know?
so it's like it's affecting our brain power on a fundamental level.
Totally. And the consequences, those are serious too, not just for us as individuals, but for whole organizations.
You mean like it's not just that I feel frazzled, it actually has tangible outcomes for the company too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, big time. We're talking decreased performance, higher accident rates, people calling out sick more often, even stuff like how many compensation claims get filed.
Dang, so it's really hitting company where it hurts, like their actual bottom line.
Yep. It's a massive factor in overall costs.
That really puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
Now, in your research, you'd mentioned how, like, our understanding of stress has kind of evolved, right? Like, what we thought caused it back in the day versus now.
Oh, for sure. Early on, it was very individualistic, like almost blaming people for their own stress because of their personality. Oh, they're just stressed out because they're like that. Thankfully, we've moved way past that now.
So we're not just slapping a type A label on someone and calling it a day.
Nope, not anymore. Now we get it a huge teethy part of this whole stress thing. It's organizational. It's the work environment itself, how tasks are designed, how much control people have. It all adds up.
So it's less about blaming the individual and more about looking at the whole system they're in.
Ex-
That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What are some of these like specific organizational stressors? The things that actually make work so stressful?
Well, research has kind of boiled it down to six main categories, which is helpful. The first one is pretty straightforward. It's factors that are intrinsic to the job itself. Like, think about the actual workload, how fast you got to work, your hours.
Yeah.
Even the physical environment plays a role.
So like that cramped, noisy office I used to work at, that was probably adding to my stress, even if I didn't realize it at the time.
Could definitely be. Then we've got like the roles we play within the organization, right? So do you know what's expected of you at work? Who you report to, your responsibilities, all that?
Yeah, most of the time, I think.
Well, if not, that's what we call role ambiguity, and it's a huge stressor for people. Then pile on top of that maybe conflicting demands, like your boss wants one thing, but your team needs another,
Hmm.
or the pressure of managing other people, and yeah, you got a recipe for burnout right there.
It seems like that's something a lot of companies struggle with, unclear expectations or like having to report to multiple people who all want different things.
Yeah, for sure. Super common. And then there's the whole career development piece, or sometimes lack thereof, which can be just as stressful, right? So
Man.
things like job insecurity, not having any opportunities to grow, feeling stuck.
Right, that feeling of like stagnation or just not knowing what the future holds in your career, that's got to be so stressful.
Huge stressor. Yep. And then, of course, we can't forget the people. Our relationships at work, those are massive when it comes to
Oh
stress.
yeah, for sure. Like if you've got a toxic boss or coworkers you can't stand, it's gonna work a lot harder.
Exactly. So think poor communication, lack of support from your colleagues or your boss, and those conflicts that just never get resolved, that stuff can just poison a whole work environment.
It's crazy how many different aspects of work can tie into stress, huh? Like, from the actual tasks to the bigger picture of our career to the relationships we have with people every day.
And the thing is, these stressors don't just like exist separately. They often overlap and kind of like amplify each other. So it gets even more complex than just one issue on its own.
Ugh, that sounds like a mess to untangle. One thing I found really interesting was the idea that not everyone reacts to these stressors the same way, right? Like, what stresses me out might not even faze someone else.
Right, that's super important. We call those individual differences, and they play a huge role in how we perceive stress and how we react to it.
So it's not just about the situation itself, it's about how each of us interprets it through our own lens.
That's a great way to put it. And yeah, some personality traits just make certain people more susceptible to feeling stress, like the classic type A personality, always got to be on the go, or folks who just tend towards negativity. They might see everything as a threat or have a harder time managing their emotions.
Okay, that makes sense. It also feels like some people are just like better at dealing with stressful stuff, period. Whether it's their personality or they've learned some tricks, I don't know.
Oh, for sure. We see this a lot in the research. There are different coping styles, right? So some people, they're like, okay, problem, gotta fix it. And they go right at it, trying to change the situation itself. That's problem-focused coping. But then you've got others who are like, all right, gotta manage how I feel about this. And they focus on their emotional response. That's emotion-focused coping.
Interesting. So it's not that one's better than the other, it's just how different people approach things.
Yep, exactly. And of course, like we were saying, your personality influences this, and the situation itself kind of dictates what's even possible.
Okay, so we've got these external stressors, our own individual personalities, and different ways of coping. It's starting to feel like one of those like brain teaser puzzles with a million pieces.
It really can be. And that's exactly why occupational health psychology has, well, it's developed several theoretical models to try and make sense of it all. Like, okay, here's a framework. Let's see if we can fit these pieces together.
So these models, they're kind of like different lenses we could look through to understand this big, messy thing called stress.
That's a great way to think about it. One of the more well-known models is called the demand control support model. It's really focused on like the balance, right, between how demanding your job is and how much control you have over it.
So like if I've got a super demanding job, but I have a lot of freedom to decide how I do it, it might actually be less stressful than a less demanding job where I have zero control.
Exactly. And this model also points out how important social support is, like having colleagues who have your back, a boss who gets it. That can make a huge difference in how you handle stress.
Yeah, makes sense. Feeling alone in a tough job just adds to the burden, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the other models that stood out to you?
Another big one is the effort reward imbalance model. This one's all about like fairness, reciprocity in the workplace. So are you putting in a ton of effort, but not really getting rewarded for it? Whether it's money, appreciation, chances to move up.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like if you feel like you're giving a lot but getting nothing in return, it's going to be super demotivating.
Totally. And it leads to a lot of resentment and burnout down the line. Oh, and one more that's super relevant to a lot of folks is the person-environment fit model. This one looks at basically how well you match with your work environment. Like, do your needs and personality line up with what the job requires and what the culture is like?
So if I'm like a super introverted person who hates meetings, but I'm stuck in a job where I got to be on and interacting with people all day long, that's probably not a good fit, huh?
Definitely not. Mismatches like that can really lead to chronic stress and make people just like generally unhappy in their work. Of course, each of these models has its pros and cons, like any theory, but they do give us helpful ways to start understanding how work impacts us on a deeper level.
This is so fascinating. We've covered the stressors themselves, then how our personalities play into it, and now these theoretical models. But I got to ask, what's actually happening in our bodies when we're stressed? Like, what's the biology behind all this?
Well, it's actually pretty amazing. So when we sense a threat, right, and that threat can be anything, a big deadline, a presentation, a difficult boss, our bodies react in this like primal way. It goes way back.
Oh, so we're talking caveman level stuff here.
Basically, there are two main systems at play. The HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, and the sympathetic nervous system.
Those sound complicated.
They are, but the main takeaway is when we think we're in danger, our bodies dump out all these hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. It's that classic fight or flight response.
So even though the danger might just be a PowerPoint presentation that's due, Our body's reacting like we're facing a lion in the jungle.
Exactly. And in the short term, this response is actually helpful. It gives us that boost of energy and focus to deal with whatever's going on.
But I imagine it's not so good if we're in that fight or flight mode like 24/7.
You got it. That's what we call chronic stress, and it's where these systems are constantly firing, and it can have some really serious consequences for our health over time.
Like, what kind of long-term effects are we talking about?
Well, the research links chronic stress to a whole bunch of stuff. Heart disease, weakened immune system, mental health issues like anxiety and depression, even digestive problems, like it's really far-reaching.
So it's not just that we feel bad, it can actually make us physically sick in the long run.
Absolutely. And another layer to consider here is that things like social inequalities, discrimination, that kind of stuff, it also contributes to people's stress levels. So it's not just about individual resilience, it's about recognizing that some people are carrying a much heavier load than others.
That's such an important point. It's like we can't just say, oh, everyone experiences stress. Just deal with it, because it's not a level playing field for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, so knowing all this and how impactful these workplace stressors are, what can we actually do about it? Like, how do we make things better?
That is the million-dollar question, and that's what we'll dive into next.
It really gets you thinking, huh? Like, about how we design workplaces and the impact they have on people's lives. But, okay, shifting gears a bit here. I'm curious about the solutions. Like, what can we actually do to create a healthier work environment? Is it just like putting a ping pong table in the break room, or is there more to it?
Well, yeah, those perks can be nice, but the research is pretty clear that we need a much more like systemic approach. It's
Yeah.
got to be about changing how we think about work fundamentally and how organizations are structured.
So we can't just put a Band-Aid on the problem. We have to address the root causes of stress.
Exactly. And remember that public health prevention model we talked about earlier, primary, secondary, tertiary. It's a really useful framework for thinking about interventions at those different levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like if we can nail that primary prevention, like stop stress before it even starts, that's going to be the most effective long-term, right?
Right. 100%. Primary prevention is all about building well-being into the very fabric of a workplace from day one. So it means tackling those 6 categories of organizational stressors we talked about head on.
Okay, so let's break it down category by category, starting with the ones that are like intrinsic to the job itself. What can we do to make the actual work less stressful?
Well, a biggie is workload. Organizations got to be realistic, right?
Yeah.
Set achievable expectations and give people the resources they need so they're not constantly feeling swamped.
Right, because that feeling of being overwhelmed all the time, that's just a recipe for burnout. One of the articles you sent had this cool study, I think it was in Europe. A company actually shortened their workday, but kept their productivity goals the same.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And they found that people were more focused and got just as much done in less time. It's like counterintuitive almost.
It challenges those old assumptions, right? Like longer hours equals more work. Turns out that's not always true. It's not just about how much work, but the quality of it too. Jobs should be designed to be engaging, to make people feel like their skills are being used, and that they have some say in how they do things.
Autonomy, that's a big one too, right? If you feel like you have some control over your work, it's got to be less stressful.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the physical work environment? Does that really make that much of a difference?
More than people think. Think about it, like noise levels, temperature, lighting, even just having an ergonomic chair and desk setup, all that stuff can either add to your stress or help reduce it.
Yeah, it's like we don't always realize how much those little comforts matter until they're gone. Like I remember working in this one office that was always freezing, and I was constantly distracted by how cold I was.
Yeah, totally. It impacts your focus, your mood, everything. So creating a comfy, supportive physical environment, that's actually a super powerful intervention and often overlooked.
All right, what about those stressors that come from, like, our roles within the organization? The whole who do I report to and what are my responsibilities kind of thing.
Yeah, that's where clarity is key. People got to know exactly what's expected of them, who they report to, what they're responsible for. If it's all ambiguous, or even worse, if they're getting conflicting demands from different people, that's just going to create a ton of stress and wasted effort.
Right, and probably lead to people stepping on each other's toes or doing the same work twice because nobody knows who's supposed to be doing what.
Exactly. Organizations also got to provide the training and support that people need to actually be successful in their roles, especially if it involves managing other people. So, invest in leadership development, teach people how to handle conflict constructively, how to communicate effectively.
So it's not just about telling someone, okay, you're in charge now. It's about giving them the skills to actually lead well.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to career development, which is a big one, especially these days, right? With everything changing so fast, organizations need to create real opportunities for people to grow and advance, even if it doesn't always look like a traditional promotion.
One of your sources mentioned lateral moves as a way to keep people engaged. What does that mean exactly?
It's basically like letting people explore different areas of the company or develop new skills, even if they're not moving up the ladder. It helps prevent that feeling of being stuck hitting a ceiling.
Yeah, because nobody wants to feel like their career is going nowhere. And what about job insecurity? That's got to be a major stressor in today's world.
Oh, huge. And a lot of it comes down to communication. If a company is transparent about their direction, if they have fair performance reviews, if they support people during tough transitions like a merger or layoffs, that can go a long way in easing people's anxieties.
So it's about being honest, even when it's tough, and treating people with respect, no matter what's happening.
Exactly. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff, the human side of all this, right? Our relationships at work. How can organizations actually foster those positive connections and make people feel like they belong?
Well, a lot of it comes down to culture. Leaders got to set the tone, right? By modeling respectful communication, being collaborative, supportive, creating a culture where people feel safe to speak up, to share their ideas, to ask for help without fear of judgment.
One of the things I read about was the importance of active listening. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's more than just hearing the words, right? It's
Yeah.
about really trying to understand the other person's perspective, asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you heard, being present in the conversation. That helps build trust and prevents those misunderstandings that can lead to conflict.
Yeah, because sometimes just feeling heard and understood can make a huge difference, especially when things are tense. Speaking of conflict, it's going to happen, right? In any workplace. How do we deal with that constructively? Right. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about learning how to manage it well. So organizations should offer training in conflict resolution skills and have a system for mediating disputes fairly so everyone feels like they're being heard.
Makes sense. Okay, last category, that homework interface. The lines are getting blurrier and blurrier these days. How can companies help people navigate that whole thing?
Flexible work arrangements are a game changer when possible, of course. Things like working from home sometimes, having flexible hours, or even compressing the work week. All that gives people more control over their schedule and helps them manage those competing demands.
Yeah, because it's not like work stops when you leave the office anymore, right?
Mm.
Emails and messages are coming in at all hours. There was one study you sent, it looked at the impact of just encouraging people to take breaks throughout the day, and it actually boosted productivity. Isn't that wild?
It is. It shows, again, that even small changes can make a big difference. Respecting boundaries around evenings and weekends, promoting a culture that values work-life balance. All that stuff sends a powerful message. It's about creating a culture of respect and understanding.
It sounds like there's a lot organizations can do, but it's also a big commitment, not a quick fix.
For sure, real change takes time, effort, and a willingness to constantly evaluate, okay, what's working, what's not. It's a constant process of improvement. Now, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, those unique challenges faced by certain groups of workers.
Yes, let's talk about that. For example, women who are often juggling like a million things at once, work, family, all of it. What can be done to better support them?
Well, things like paid parental leave, affordable childcare, flexible work options, those can make a huge difference in allowing women to fully participate in the workforce without having to choose between their career and their family.
Right, because it shouldn't be this either-or situation.
Yeah.
It's about providing that structural support, not just expecting women to figure it all out on their own.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that works for everyone. And what about unemployment? That's a major life stressor, and it often comes with a lot of shame and stigma, which just makes it harder.
Yeah, you can feel really isolated and like you're the only one going through it, which isn't true at all.
We need to address this on multiple levels, right? So things like unemployment insurance, job training programs, those are crucial for providing that practical support during those transitions. But we also need to change the narrative around it, culturally,
Mm.
recognizing that it's often a systemic issue, not a personal failing.
So creating a more compassionate and supportive environment for job seekers.
Exactly. And then there are those professions we talked about that have those crazy high rates of burnout and compassion fatigue. Healthcare workers, social workers, vets, they deal with some really heavy stuff day in and day out.
Yeah, one of your sources mentioned that vets actually have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession. That's heartbreaking.
It is. And it shows how important it is to have strong support systems within those professions.
Yeah?
So, access to counseling, peer support groups, training in self care and stress management, and a work culture that acknowledges the emotional toll of that kind of work and doesn't just expect people to tough it out.
It's about caring for the caregivers, right? Because they can't pour from an empty cup.
Well said. And then we have temporary workers who often lack job security, benefits, that sense of belonging within the organization.
One article you sent talked about how they can feel disposable, like they're not really valued.
Yeah, that's a big problem. We got to advocate for fair labor practices, make sure all workers have basic protections and support, regardless of their employment status. And organizations got to be mindful of how they integrate temp workers, make them feel included and respected, like they're part of the team.
So treating everyone with dignity, regardless of where they fall in the org chart.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and supported, which brings us right back to those core principles of occupational health psychology, right? Promoting well-being for all workers.
That's a great point to emphasize. Okay, before we move on to our last section, I want to circle back to the future of work. How do we make sure that this world of work that's changing so rapidly with all the new tech and everything, how do we make sure it actually supports well-being and doesn't just make things worse?
That is the question, right? And it requires a lot of careful thought. First off, got to remember, technology is a tool. It can be used for good or bad, and we have a responsibility to shape how it's integrated into work so it actually makes things better, not worse.
So it's not about being anti-technology. It's about being intentional with how we use it.
Exactly. One of the big worries is, of course, jobs disappearing as automation takes over, right? But that also creates an opportunity. We can redesign jobs so they focus on those uniquely human skills, things like creativity, critical thinking, complex problem solving, social intelligence, stuff that machines, at least for now, aren't very good at.
That's a much more optimistic way to look at it. It's about adapting, evolving, not just being afraid of change.
For sure. And it means giving workers the skills they need to thrive in this new landscape. So investing in training, development programs, things that promote adaptability, digital literacy, lifelong learning, those are key.
So it's a shared responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Individuals got to be proactive, but organizations got to provide the resources and opportunities. What else should we be thinking about as we look ahead to this future of work?
This is a big one. We have to cultivate a culture of well-being within organizations. And that means recognizing that employees are whole people with lives outside of work. It means promoting work-life balance, having support systems that address people's diverse needs.
Yeah, it's not just about work, work, work 24/7. It's about the whole person. Seems like a lot of companies are starting to get that, offering things like on-site childcare, wellness programs, mental health benefits.
It's a good sign, for sure. It's about creating a workplace that's not just tolerable, but actually enjoyable. A place where people feel valued, respected, and supported in reaching their goals, both at work and in their personal lives.
Okay, so to wrap up this part of our deep dives, what are some key things we should remember about creating this healthier, more fulfilling future of work?
Well, it boils down to a few core principles, I think. We need to design work that's meaningful and engaging. We need to build positive relationships and supportive cultures. And we need to provide the resources and flexibility that people need to thrive, both at work and in their lives outside of work.
So it's not just about checking boxes. It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about work and its role in our lives as a whole.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that leads us perfectly into our final part, where we'll explore some thought-provoking questions about the future of work and how we can each play a role in creating a more positive and sustainable path forward.
Man, we've covered so much ground already. It's kind of crazy how connected work and well-being really are.
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced than most people realize, I think.
Totally. And it's a field that's constantly changing too, right? Like
Yeah.
as work itself changes, so does the research and the approaches.
Oh, absolutely. But one thing that always stays the same is that connection between individual well-being and how effective the organization is as a whole.
Right. That's what's really stuck with me, that it's a two-way street. Like, healthy, happy people contribute to a healthy organization, and a healthy organization supports individual well-being. So it's like this positive feedback loop.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think differently about how we approach work in general, right? Like in this century, it's not just about profits anymore. It's about taking a more holistic view,
Right.
recognizing that people are valuable, human capital, all that.
One of your sources had this great quote. It was like, you can't squeeze blood from a stone, talking about how pushing employees to their breaking point, it just hurts everyone in the end.
Oh, yeah, I love that. It's so true. Like when people are stressed, burnt out, just not engaged, it impacts everything. Their performance tanks, they're not creative, they make bad decisions. And ultimately, yeah, the company suffers too. So investing in well-being, it's not just the nice thing to do, it's good business sense.
More companies are starting to get that, which is good. But it's also important to remember there's no magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
Like, what helps one person de-stress might not work for someone else.
Totally. Individual differences are massive. So someone who's naturally anxious, maybe mindfulness training would help them, but someone else who loves a challenge, they might need more opportunities to grow and take on more responsibility. It's about figuring out what each person needs, not just assuming one thing will work for everyone.
It's like that saying, different strokes for different folks. And it's not just personality either, right?
Yeah.
Like, some groups of workers have unique challenges based on their life or the type of work they do.
Right. Working parents, people who are unemployed, those in high-stress jobs, they all need different kinds of support. So it's about making sure the workplace is inclusive, equitable, recognizing all those diverse needs.
It seems like we've come a long way from just, like, offering a yearly stress management seminar and calling it good.
Oh, for sure. Now, the best companies, they're weaving well-being into the culture itself. Like, it's part of everything they do. It's not just about perks. It's about making people feel valued, respected, and, like, supported in reaching their goals. Not just work goals, but life goals, too.
So, as we wrap up this whole deep dive into occupational health psychology, what are some, like, key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
The biggest one, I'd say, is that work doesn't have to be this soul-crushing thing, right? It can be a place where people actually thrive and find meaning. It's just about, like, shifting our mindset and being proactive about creating that more positive future of work.
I love that. What are some questions our listeners might want to ask themselves as they head back to their own work lives?
Well, maybe they can think about, like, what are the biggest stressors in their workplace? And what are some small changes they could make, maybe on their own or with their team, to start promoting well-being? Even little things can make a difference.
Yeah, those are great starting points. And looking even further ahead, what are some of the, like, big picture questions we should all be thinking about as tech keeps changing the world of work?
That's a good one. Like, how do we ensure those jobs of the future, they're not just productive, but they're also meaningful for people? How do we use technology in a way that actually makes well-being better? And how do we build those work cultures that value human connection and support, even when everything's becoming more digital?
Those are some heavy questions, but super important ones for sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us today. This has been amazing.
It's been my pleasure. I can tell you've put a lot of thought into this yourself, and hopefully our conversation has given you and our listeners some new things to think about.
Absolutely. And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into occupational health psychology. Remember, the future of work, it's really up to all of us to shape it, so let's create something great.